Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. It gives you everything you need in one place for free, which you can use right from your phone or computer. Creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can easily make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Awesome. Welcome back to another episode of It Is What It Is podcast. I'm your host, Cody Kelly. Look, connect with me on all major social media platforms. You know what my favorite platform is? Instagram. You can connect with me at CVMK33, or my second favorite one, which you should subscribe to right now at the link below, YouTube at CV Space K. You can connect with me on all streaming platforms where podcasts are heard. It doesn't matter if it's Apple, Spotify. It's out there. Go connect. I have an amazing series that I'm just started. It's called Meet Them, where I highlight amazing influencers in their creative space. This particular episode is Meet the Author. I have an amazing author, an amazing influencer. She is becoming one of the coolest people that I know, especially in the podcast universe. And she's an avid fitness influencer. Check her out. But look, let's introduce her. She's on the show. Jazz, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you this evening?
Hey, you know, not too bad for a light-skinned brother, just bald out here. So I'm doing all right. I appreciate this. Well, Jazz, I know you're an author. There is a lot of content out there. So I always want to start with the simple why, right? Like, why go down this route? Why write anything, because podcasting, and I get it, like now media and reading is all different with Audible, but why become an author? What particularly drove you to this?
I am an writer first. I'll say that because that's all I could ever be. There was never another path for me. Sometimes you learn something in life, and like that is the core of who you are. Like, you just align so perfectly with that passion. So I was reading at 3 and writing my own little books on spiral notebook paper at 7, trying to sell them for 10 cents with my dad, so so it was like, that's always what I was always going to be, some type of writer. I didn't know in what way that was going to shape out. And so into adulthood, I went to college and I took a more corporate route, and I'm a writer in the tech space. But I picked back up on like my love of writing in my past time. So in college, I, did a couple of creative nonfiction pieces that ended up being published. And I had the opportunity to be a part of a publication, like the back end part of that, and see how that works, and to actually like acquire some pieces and sit down with other writers and vet their pieces. And so it was always a goal for me to work on some kind of books. I didn't know when or how I was going to finally sit down and write my first book, sure, cover to cover. It was just such a daunting task because, again, it's something I wanted to do since I was as long as I could remember. So I was happy to kind of ease my way into that with low content book publishing. And now, as I'm preparing to publish my first fiction book, which is something I never thought I would get around to doing.
Hey, I like it. Before we get into the book, you started off explaining what is the difference between being a writer and being an author? Because maybe there is a difference, and I wouldn't call myself a avid author, right? Like, wrote my first one back in college, sold 1,000 copies. It was cool. It was more of a kind of a theological understanding of how the world works. And then now I'm kind of stuck right in this creative space. But what really is the difference between being a writer and an author?
I think a lot of people would define an author as someone who has like published work, usually a book. Is how people define it. I think one thing that I hate sometimes when it comes to like the writing and publishing community, because it is such an easily accessible art, and there's such a low barrier to entry. People try to kind of use this elitism to kind of create like, oh, well, I'm an author versus a writer and whatnot. I call myself a writer because I don't just publish works, fiction and nonfiction or whatever. Like I'm a technical writer too. Like I write I'm a copywriter too. I'm a UX writer, So that's why I call myself a writer. But I think it just really depends on who you ask, but usually someone who's published some type of book or some other creative work.
Does it count? Because I only sold to the people in my church. Like nobody else outside my church bought it. Does that count still? Like, I know you mentioned elitism. Like, look, I'm not an elite writer. It was only to like missionaries and church mothers that really bought my book. You know, so,
you better claim your title.
Yeah,
you better claim your title.
Nice to me. I was supporting. They was like, "We're gonna support you, brother." Then nobody read it. They just bought it, and it was like $7. So Look,
claim it.
You're into this. You got, like you said, your first published work is coming out. You're talking about low content writing. Walk me down that journey. So, where did the inspiration for this start, and then how did it kind of evolve into this concept?
Yeah, I'll start with, for me, it's hard to even figure out. I'll start all the way back. So, like I said, I went to school, got out with my degree in technical writing, went into the tech space. Became really, really close to one of my deep friends. So I'm gonna get a little personal with y'all for a minute. So one of my friends, some people you connect with in life and you're like, this is my person. And she was just like one of my super close friends. And we got really close, and she talked a lot about like her goals and dreams. And we ended up finding out that she got diagnosed with cancer. So she was trying to, in her mid-30s, so she was very young. And, she was trying to fight this. And I remember one of our conversations, she said, "Jazz, this isn't all I'm supposed to do. I know there's more for me. There's more I'm supposed to be doing." And she died. So she didn't get a chance to do what she wanted to finish doing. And for me, that really resonated with me because at that point in my life, it was my first job out of college. And I was like, what is the thing that I have to do to be at peace when I leave this earth? What is the one thing? And I was like, the one out of all the things that I like to do, one thing that if I didn't do, I wouldn't feel like I fulfilled my purpose is to write a book. Like, I feel like that was something I was told I was supposed to do that at like 7 years old. Yeah. At this time I'm here in my mid 20s and I still haven't done it. And so I was like, I need to do this. And so that kind of set things in motion to me, like, okay, you need to start writing. So at first I just kind of started, I've always been good at like writing short things. So I started there. I was like, let me just write some kind of short things. Let me write about what's going on in my life. Really big on creative nonfiction, so it was and my writing has always been very personal to me. So it was, at that time I was going through a divorce. So I started writing about that because that was something I needed to write about anyway. Cause again, it's a part of who I am. That's how I process things. So I was like, let me write about that and let me turn that into a book. And so after I kind of finished the divorce and was done with that, I didn't want to really return that project because that project was so deeply rooted in emotion. It took me to a very heavy place to sit there and work on that project. So I was like, I'm gonna step back from that. And so I have 3 daughters, and as my daughters started to get older, I'm really big on representation for them. And I want them to always feel represented in the house, everywhere, just as much as possible, because outside of the house, they may not see that. So, I would get on Amazon like most parents, and I'm looking for books and content that's centered around Black children. And, I noticed there was a gap in this space for low content books. So when I say low content, it's stuff like journals, literally think about low content journals, coloring books with words and stuff, and sketchbooks, all of those little simple things that we don't think about that still impact our children. Because if I want to go give my child a sketchbook and the little girl on the cover doesn't look like her, and none of the little girls on the covers look like her, does she feel like she could one day be on the cover of a sketchbook? Can she draw a sketchbook with someone who looks like her? And so it started to bother me that representation wasn't there for my daughters. And I was like, okay, instead of complaining about it, who would create that? Well, I'm a writer. I'm an actual writer. So ideally I should be able to create something for my kids. So my very first low content project, I said, I just want to create a very simple sketchbook with prompts for my kids. And I want a little Black girl on the cover. That's it. It didn't have to be anything spectacular. So I started to research that in that process and, play around with a little bit of design software. And I put together my first little book, and I spent so much time working on it for it to be so low content, but each prompt just had something that was important that I felt like little Black girls needed to feel represented. So, sketch your favorite hair scarf, things that are specific to our culture, draw your hair in cornrows and what that looks like, pretend you are a tree rooted in the earth. What does that feel like? Just those types of prompts that I felt I wanted my daughters to see, and I feel like other people's daughters would connect with. So I just put it out there, for a few dollars on Amazon. I was like, just let it exist. And if there's a market for it, there's a market. But more important for me, it was for my daughters first. And that's just something that I felt that was important. And so it started to sell. And it did pretty well. And, it's one of my highest selling books now. And it has, it has a few stars on Amazon and everything, and high ratings. And it's a very simple book. It's nothing spectacular. It's just that small part of representation that we didn't have, and so I started to just really take advantage of that niche and, create a boys version of that book, and create more journals for self-care and stuff that were centered around Black women. And so, and I started to split it over different brands on Amazon, and I have some that aren't necessarily specifically for Black women, but, it still could be, my first novel or something like that, that are on some of my more general brands and whatnot. But I just started to put those out there. And from there, I was like, okay, I feel like I can tackle like a full content book now. But that's how I got into the low content space.
That's amazing. First of all, you almost made me cry. I'm sorry to hear about the passing of your friend and the divorce. I had lost my father due to cancer. So anytime I hear that, I almost broke down and ruined this whole thing. So
I'm sorry to hear. It's a hard loss. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry for that. But you're talking about that evolution, and that's amazing. And now you have Amazon reviews. It's great, and it's gained this attraction. Why do you think there was such a void in this space? How come in the most basic things, right? From journaling, not seeing yourself, on the cover of a material that is for somebody 1 to 10 years old, right? Like, why is there such a lack of diversity and lack of representation in these particular areas?
Yeah, I think a lot of times one thing that really resonated me that was said to me in a conversation recently was, as Black people, we don't know that some things, literally like jobs, career options, don't exist because we've never seen them. We've never seen them. Or if we have seen, we've never seen a Black person in them. So some things we just don't even know exist. And I feel like we know that authors exist. We know that you can write a full content book. How often do you really think about, like, when I go into Dollar General and pick up a couple of journals, someone had to create the cover for that journal, and if we're not realizing and thinking about this as an occupation and no one's telling us, we may not think about it. Now, low content publishing has been growing. There are definitely a lot of other Black authors out there I know who create this content, but it's so easily seen as just a space for, like, just to get quick money. People just throw something up there, and it's not necessarily targeted to a specific group. They're like, oh, I'm going to draw a really cute picture on Procreate and throw it up there with a bunch of colors. But for me, it was very intentional for me to, like, no, this has to have a Black woman, Black child, some kind of way on this particular cover, because I think it's those small things that we don't think about where we need to be represented. So I think it just could be a matter of some of us not knowing about the space. We're new to the space, so we're starting to infiltrate it, and I'm starting to see, I'm so happy to see so much more low content work up now than even when I started. So it's definitely growing. And I've seen, just like off of the sketchbook that I had, someone has gone and created like a full content book with pictures and stuff. It's not a direct bite off mine, but still, regardless, I'm glad that they were inspired and created a full content book for a child to read, off of that. So the more that we see each other in the space, and now that we know that exists, that's definitely a space we will be permeating. And I just think it's just a matter of us not knowing. And then the people who were dominating that space just didn't necessarily have us at the front of their mind when they were creating what they wanted to create.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense. So a lot of times, when passion is fueled, product gets created. But I always say there's a tipping point between, the energy behind something and then the commitment to that thing, and then that thing taking over everything, right? Where are you in that process? Let's say your works, become, number one bestseller, right? To the point they're requesting more of this content, more low content publishing and more just creation and more product, when does it shift to not only is this something I do, this is what I do? Like, when does that shift happen?
I know for me, my long-term goal is to have a publishing company. So that's a legacy. I think in terms of legacy of what I want to leave for my children. So that's one thing that I want to be able to leave to them. So I know for me at this point, I'm still early in the game. I still have a lot of energy behind it. I'm passionate about it. And I think what I love the most about it is that once I create it, I use Amazon's print on demand service. So I don't have to manage the orders and the inventory or anything like that. I literally just upload the files and set pricing and I'm done. So that's passive income that's constantly coming in for me. And for my children, because they get a percentage of that too. So, like that's something that I don't have to worry about. So I definitely can see myself continuing to grow it because I want this hole in the market to be filled. And even when it's filled, we'll find another way to create and iterate. And I think there's so much going on with technology and what you can do with your work as a writer and author and stuff that's happening with blockchain technology and crypto media and what that means for creation in the digital space. I think there will always be ways for us to evolve.
That's true. And if you decide to go public anytime soon, I just want to be the early investor. So when it does explode, I can retire and be like, yeah, I invested in that. I knew our interview. When you're in this process and you're putting out your work, one of the things that I struggled with, and granted, I wrote a book for that particular niche. I wrote a book for believers, but I was so afraid of what people thought. I was so afraid of opinions and getting negatively critiqued. Like I admit I held back. There was things I deleted. There was chapters that I didn't go into full depth with. Now that I'm kind of in this process of trying to write something, now I feel like I'm too far out there, right? Like, what is that balance? Or I should say better phrase, what is that struggle? Even when you're doing low content work, I mean, is there apprehension? Is like, what if the people don't like this? Or should you just ignore and just go with what is true and authentic to you?
I think for me, it's like two ways. So on the low content piece, it's so low stakes to create. Like I can literally sit down and with an hour have an idea, upload it and get it on the market. So it's so low stakes because Amazon is such a saturated market. It's like if people pick it up with the keywords or whatever and they like it, they do. If they don't, I'm turning out another book because it's so little work for me to do. I don't invest as much energy into it as far as people will like it or not. I just more so create like, this is something that I don't see that's been addressed on the market. This is what I'm going to create. Now, when it comes to my full content work, like my creative nonfiction and my fiction, I'll talk more specifically about my fiction book because that's what I'm most deeply invested in now. I'm probably about 2/5 of the way through the book. And that has been... that has been challenging because for that particular book, it is a sci-fi book and it's an Afro-futurist book. And so it takes place in a setting and time in which race is no longer a thing and gender discrimination is no longer a thing because it's so set far in the future. So kind of idealistic in some sense, but the reality hits you pretty hard in the book. But it's definitely a lot of scenes that I write. And I'm concerned. I'm like, am I accurately representing these characters? If I'm writing characters who are, of a specific lifestyle or culture that I'm not familiar with, because as much as I want to accurately reflect these characters, I still have my own bias. I can only write from my lived experience. Right. So, that's always a struggle for me because I want to make sure I'm accurately representing people and I don't want to be offensive. So I have a writing partner I meet with every week, one of my really close friends from college, and she's already written an entire series and we're really close. And she helps me a lot with like just running ideas by her. And I'm like, how do you feel about that? And because she's been down that road before, she does a lot of reassuring, behavior for me. She'll say like, okay, don't think so much about what people are going to say. It's your book, it's your character. People are always going to not like something that you write, but everything is not for everybody. You know, you have to know your audience. And so I kind of take that the same way I take some of my other works, you know, like, as you know, I have a podcast on my shirt, and my podcast is pretty, it can be pretty raw for some people, you know, and so if you can't jive with it, and
that's it.
Okay.
Don't look at it, right?
That's it. It don't have to be for you. And I really love that whole saying. It's one of my favorite action movies, pretty brutal movie, 300 with the Spartans. Yeah. And there's that scene where like Leonidas is talking to, I can't even remember the other group that he's talking to. And he's like, how many men did you bring? And he's like, I brought, you know, all these things, and they're naming off their professions. Yeah. And then he's like, Spartans, what is your profession? And they just chant in unison. And I think about that. And he's like, see, I brought more men than you. And it's like, I don't need a 1,000 fans. I need a solid 10 that's going to be there every single day, all the time. They're going to support everything I do. So I try to focus on that. Like, yes, I mean, a lot of people that are not going to really fool with it. It wasn't for you. But the ones that do, they're going to buy all my books. They're going to attend everything that I do. They're going to be invested in. That's what I need. You know, I'm not trying to convince the whole world to buy into, you know, my novel or my craft. Just the ones who it speaks to and resonates with them. That's who I'm trying to talk to.
I like that. And I've been on the podcast. If you haven't, Black Executive, check out Jasmine's podcast. I'm going to give her the plug on my podcast. I've been a guest. She is amazing, just podcast host. I had an amazing time. And we just keep it real. I mean, I said a lot of stuff on that podcast that I can't say during the workday, you know. You know, we just keep it real. We just keep it real. That's what we do. I like, first of all, things that stood out to me. You just need your 10. I think we're living in the what I call the click or the Instagram kind of thought process. Like, how do I get to 100 likes in the first 10 minutes, right? Like, so instead of creating something that we're really passionate about, we really want to drive home in our own unique space. We want to have that appeal, that mass market appeal. So, you know, if it's not us, but it's going to get us views, we'll do it. You know, kind of like the Spot 'em challenge, which I think is hilarious, but at the same time, it's overplayed because I'm seeing like people, I'm like, you don't even listen to that type of music, you know, but I get it, right? You just want the viewership. So I totally agree. I think you hit it dead on. That sounds like an amazing concept. A post-racial society yet dealing with afro futurism. I can see without knowing, right, where that is really going to kind of go in. That sounds like an amazing feat and just amazing journey, and looking forward. And I will purchase. So talk to me. So you're welcome. So you talk to me about the fiction one. Now there's the creative nonfiction side, right? So, you know, sometimes, you know, fiction is life represented in masterful and colorful artistic ways to express a reality that is not our reality, but a projected reality. Because I don't separate it as fake versus non-fake anymore, because sometimes this nonfiction stuff is just as good as fiction, right? So talk to me about that process, that creative journey for the creative nonfiction.
Ooh, so now that's definitely one of my softer spots where I'm a little bit more sensitive, because so much of my creative nonfiction work starts as me having a moment where I'm like, I need to get this off my chest. Gotcha. But those pieces end up being my most vulnerable pieces. So the first piece I had published was actually a piece that I wrote during my marriage, early in my marriage, when my husband's grandmother's house burned down. Oh, wow. And this house literally was so old, they had built it, their family built it by hand, brick by brick. And so when it burned, the interior burned, but the actual structure stood. Sounds like a sermon.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So when that happened, it was hard for me as a young wife and being very early in my marriage to figure out how to be there for my husband in that moment and to understand what he needed from me. And so I had to sit down and write about that and what that moment was like, and me processing that, because it was this awkward place where it's like, I felt like I couldn't quite grieve because it wasn't what it was for me to them. You know, as much as I was close to them, that wasn't my family who built that house. You know, it was their legacy and all that. And so I was like, I didn't feel as comfortable in my grief about that as, you know, he did. And I was like, how can I support him? And so when I wrote that piece, it was a really hard piece for me to write. And when I decided to submit it for publication, I think I ended up at that time, I was like sharing my work because I was in college. I think I shared it at an event and somebody was like nudging me, like, you should really submit for that to be published. And I did. And it actually got picked up and I got to actually perform it like in front of an audience. And it was like live on this radio station. So I like to say I'm famous in Ireland because apparently the station was really big in Ireland. But it was a really cool experience. But it was very vulnerable because this is my life. And this is and on top of that, it was an intimate moment in my marriage. And I was just kind of putting it out there, but people received it so well. So many people like cried when I performed it. And it was just like, oh my gosh. Like, and that power and that vulnerability is what has encouraged me to continue. So like the second piece from that ended up getting published was a piece about me going through the same thing I talked about earlier with representation from my daughter, trying to find a doll in a store that looked like my daughter. I had a light-skinned daughter with like this mixed texture hair. And it was like, I was struggling because I was like, when you go to the aisle, they only have white dolls and then they have one black doll and the black doll only looks one way. And I was like, Black people look a lot of different more shades and hair types and, you know, than that. And I'm like, this is a beautiful black doll, but that's not what my baby looks like. And so I was kind of struggling with, and she really wanted a doll for Christmas, for her birthday. And so I kind of struggled with that. And so again, it was a very vulnerable piece for me as a parent trying to figure out like, what is the best decision? And like, why was this such a hard decision? Something like picking a doll, right? It should be simple. Why was it such a hard decision for me? And so again, it was another piece that I wrote that really resonated well and got published in a zine. So it's those really raw moments that tend to get picked up. And so I've learned to not hide behind those. Like I have to be vulnerable in my writing. So I think I'm actually probably a lot more comfortable with sharing my creative nonfiction work than my fiction work, because in creative nonfiction, it's like, this is my life. This is an experience I had. You can feel how you're going to feel, but this is what I lived through, you know?
No, that makes sense. I didn't look growing up. There was nothing that looked like me on as far as toys, as far as stuff on TV. You know, I tell people all the time, look, until 2005, when I first heard of President Obama, I was clueless. I was like, I need somebody on this thing that reflects me in some aspect. And it is, you need to see that representation. You talk about the vulnerability. Is it, I won't say fair, but why does it seem like the hurt that happens in people's life is what draws other? Like almost like pain is purposeful, if that makes sense, right? You know, because it's what gravitates, it's what pulls, and what captures the audience's attention. During this process, and as you got more comfortable with the vulnerability and sharing your story, has it been therapeutic, or is it more, because you mentioned I got to get off my chest, is it more for the I want to inspire and tell somebody it's okay, or is it more for an inner healing?
For me, it's always for me. I always write for me. I never write for anybody else. I think when I have to write for someone else, I don't always speak in my authentic voice. I speak in the voice that's tiptoeing around feelings and if I'm going to offend somebody and all. I don't want to write like that. So when I write, it's just like I need to say everything that is on my mind right now. So it's very much catharsis in healing for me, and that's a part of my philosophy that I encourage all writers. So I taught writing for 7 years for college students, and so that's one thing that I always told them as well. Like, you just write from your heart and your soul. Then once you get it out on paper, you can structure it and figure out what you want to do with it. But you just need to get it out. So when I write, it's just like, get this off my chest. And if I feel like it's cohesive and it can go somewhere and I want to share, if I feel like someone can be uplifted or inspired or just feel seen, I feel like sometimes, like your question about the pain, I feel like sometimes people resonate with pain because they just want to know that someone can adequately capture something they may have experienced or something that they felt. I know, like, I think about the same way with music, right? When you go through a breakup and you listen to a bunch of love songs, you don't really want to fester on the hurt, but you want to know someone in the world has experienced this type of pain and was able to channel and express it in this creative medium, which is this love song. It's like, I don't want to sit and wallow in my misery, but I need someone to feel what I'm going through right now. And this woman screaming on this track right now is going through what I'm going through right now. So we can scream and cry together in the mirror, so in the shower, in the rain, crying like a 90s Jodeci video.
I get it. Oh, man.
But yeah.
I'm trying not to share that story, man. Look, totally unrelated. This is random. This is a random moment. Way long time ago. I understand. Before I met my wife, I kind of had one of those, moments, and like, I don't know why, like 90s R&B and even old school, like I was listening to Al Green and Tears on a Pillow type stuff, like, because I wanted to express it, but I couldn't express it, and I'm like, these songs make sense, right?
Yeah.
Thank God for Jesus. I was told, thank God for my wife, and thank God for that deliverance, because there ain't no more.
Yeah, that's real. That is real. And I feel like you want to know that someone in the world has experienced what you experience, and you're not alone. And it's normal, right? It's normal when you find out, because sometimes I feel like, especially when you're going through grief or you're trying to process something, you feel so alone in the moment, and you're like, is there anyone else who has experienced this? Is there anyone else who's gone through this? Am I overreacting? Am I underreacting? Am I abnormal in some way? And then when you see that expressed in writing or in music or whatever, you're like, this is a normal human experience, and whoever this person who created this is still functioning in life, and I can get past this too. So I think that's kind of why people resonate with it. I mean, we have plenty of joyous and happy moments, and I write about those too. But the pain, it's like, when you're I feel like almost when you're happy and you're just in so much joy, you're so busy experiencing that moment. You don't really, I know for me, I don't always have time to capture that on paper. I'm just experiencing it and being happy. But when you're in pain, you can't think about anything else. But the pain is like, what else can I do with this? I need to dump it on this paper.
You're right. Happiness creates complacency. That's what the reality. And then unfortunately, pain creates purpose. So I want to go here. And I want to thank you for your time again. You've been amazing. As this thing progresses, let's say somebody reaches out to you. Let's say Tyler Perry. Maybe not Tyler Perry. Maybe like Ryan Coogler, right? I love Tyler Perry. I just think creatively, I think, everything can't have the same format. So let's say Ryan Coogler, right?
I like Ryan better.
I feel like this is falling to Ryan's, right? Kind of his niche, right? So reaches out and say like, hey, look, I read the writing. This afro futurism is really hidden. I think we can create a cinematic feature. I want to use this as a screenplay and create, and take creative license, obviously, to flesh out, details and lines and whatnot. Would you be willing to allow your book to become a feature film?
I love that question, because when I actually sat down to write the first scene for it, and let me backtrack to that story. So again, how I was saying, like, I wasn't even like writing fiction. I had no intentions on writing fiction. I was actually working on 100% nonfiction piece about my craft as a technical writer and some D&I work that I was doing, like a very complete 180, like very technical research based academic type writing that I was planning to work on. And I had this dream, and this dream was so vivid, it felt like a movie to me. And so I was like, I woke up and was like, I'm gonna write this down. I need to write this down right now. Wrote it down, didn't return to it for maybe 7-8 months. Get on the call, like I said, with my friend, for us to do our little weekly write meetup. And, she's talking about these fiction stories she's working on. And she was like, have you thought about returning to fiction? I was like, no, but I did recently write about this dream, but that's not what I want to talk about. And I kind of brushed it off. She's like, no, tell me about it. Let me see it. I let her see it. She was like, if you don't write this book, and it's the power of having friends that see stuff in you don't see.
That's it.
Another sermon. But she said, if you don't write this book, like you need to write this book and tell this story. And then I started working on it from there. So when I initially wrote it down, I wrote it as a screenplay. Like I wrote it, seeing it as being a movie because it was so vivid to me. And I wanted this scene to play out. So I would 100% absolutely be on board with it. I will say this now. I'm on Clubhouse, so I've had the opportunity to be in several rooms with Zane, who, if you're not familiar with, she's writer, erotica, you know. But she
well, you know, I'm familiar. You gotta watch this like, Reverend, what you mean? I'll be like, you know what, like, I'm familiar. I know what she does, you know.
Yeah. So, and Horrible, I was reading her books. Most women I know, we were reading her books as teens, which is terrible, but that's how we was learning stuff. But yeah, so she's pretty active on Clubhouse, and I'm in a couple of her rooms, and they're usually pretty small and intimate. So I've had a chance to ask her some questions, and and she had a room about like having your book turned to a screenplay. And I put it out there and I was like, so I'm working on a sci-fi novel, and what's the chances of it getting picked up, or like, how do I kind of write with these scenes in mind? She was like, baby, just write your book, baby. Them budgets be too high for sci-fi. Just write your book. She had to have like a nice girl boss. She was like, write your book, baby. Just write your book. And if it get picked up, but right now just focus on the book. So I've definitely thought about other ways I can visually represent my work. If a screenplay isn't an option, because it costs a lot of money to create a world that doesn't exist. You can't just go out and shoot sci-fi in the environment, because some of this stuff doesn't even exist, or it's a totally different world. But yeah, I would 100% be on board with that.
Awesome. I like it. Go out and write your book. That's whatever it is, just go out and write it. Hey, I want to join, and sometimes I think about joining Clubhouse, and then I'd be like, do I really want to engage with, even though I engage with, people I don't know that, but it's like, I don't know, like, to do that, I'm hesitant. I really want to get on Clubhouse, but sometimes I'm lazy. I'm gonna be honest with you. You know what hinders Cody? Because sometimes, like, I just be sitting there, like, I just want to watch LeBron James play, and then the Lakers game come on, and then I lose all creativity, and that's what happens. Where can they buy the book, Jazz? Where can it? So when this comes out, your stuff will be on the screen. Where can they buy the book?
Yes. So when it is out, which I'm hoping will be published this year, because like I said, I'm getting there. I'm not saying I have my own site, Jazz Will Write, and that's where I have like just currently like my portfolio and things like that. But I plan on reshaping that site to include my published works as well. So you'll be able to find it on jazzwillwrite.com, JASWILLWRITE.com.
I got it. jazzwillwrite.com. Guys, go out there. Guys and gals, go out there. Get the book. Support Jazz. Amazing author. But don't just support her with the books. Support her on the podcast. Where can the people connect with you? Where can they follow you?
Yes. So I'm at Black Executive. It's Black Executive, but no E in the middle. So BLACKXECTIV. It went the wrong way, but y'all get what I'm saying. So follow me at Black Executive. You can find it on blackexecutive.com. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you stream. And we're on YouTube now. So we're doing video interviews, which you will catch Cody's when it drops too.
Follow her on YouTube, Instagram at Black Executive. Follow the podcast, buy the books. And of course, if you're following her, you got to support me. By YouTube, Stevie Plays K, and you want to support Black-owned businesses, everything is up there. All you need to do is support. I appreciate my guests again, Jazz. You are amazing. You are an amazing gift to humanity. These books, they're much needed. We need representation in every single sphere of life because there are little children who do not see themselves and grew up with identity issues like myself because I did not see myself, and I didn't know if I needed to be dark skin like Michael Jordan or blonde hair, blue eyes, because that's all I saw was around me. The only Black person that was visible was MJ, and everything else was, white. So I appreciate you so much time. Support Jazz. And as always, thank you for tuning in for another episode of It Is What It Is podcast.
Thank you.